Have you ever wondered how a story born thousands of years ago can still capture our imaginations today? Across centuries and civilizations, myths have served as vessels of human wisdom, mystery, and longing, bridging the gap between what we know and what we dream. Among these legends, few have woven themselves so deeply into the fabric of our collective consciousness as the tale of the Labyrinth, a symbol of complexity, danger, and the search for truth. It's a story that invites us into shadowy corridors of the ancient world, where myth and reality blur into one mesmerizing puzzle. Picture a structure so vast and bewildering that once you step inside, there may be no way out. A place where every turn leads deeper into confusion, where even the bravest souls can lose their way. This is the labyrinth of King Minos, home to the mythic Minotaur, a creature both monstrous and tragic, born of human ambition and divine punishment. For generations, this legend has whispered to us from the pages of history, raising tantalizing questions. Was the labyrinth merely a myth, a cautionary tale spun by poets and storytellers, or could it have been inspired by a real place, a marvel of ancient engineering lost to time? Join me as we venture into one of history's most captivating enigmas, tracing the echoes of this myth across art, architecture, and archaeology. We'll explore not only what the story means, but why it continues to resonate with such power and mystery. Together, we'll walk the winding paths of imagination and evidence, searching for clues that might lead us to the heart of the labyrinth itself, and perhaps to a deeper understanding of our own endless fascination with the unknown. This is more than just a story. It's an invitation to wonder, to question, and to rediscover the thrill of exploration that connects us all. To understand the legend of the labyrinth, we must first journey to the sun-drenched island of Crete during the height of the Minoan civilization, a time when gods and mortals were said to interact directly with one another. At the center of our story stands King Minos, a powerful ruler who prayed to the god Poseidon for a sign of divine favor. He asked the god of the sea to send him a magnificent bull, promising to sacrifice it immediately as an offering. Poseidon agreed and sent a stunningly beautiful white bull from the waves, a creature so perfect it seemed otherworldly. But when Minos saw this magnificent animal, his greed overcame his piety. He could not bear to destroy such a splendid creature, so he decided to keep it for himself and substituted an ordinary bull from his herds for the sacrifice. This act of deception did not go unnoticed by the gods. In Greek mythology, a broken vow to a deity was a grave offense, and Poseidon's wrath was swift and cunning. Rather than smiting Minos directly, the god chose a more subtle and cruel punishment. He inflicted a powerful passion upon Pasiphae, the wife of King Minos, causing her to fall deeply and irrationally in love with the very white bull her husband had kept. Consumed by this unnatural desire, Queen Pasiphae sought the help of the brilliant but doomed artisan Daedalus, who was serving at the king's court. Daedalus constructed a hollow wooden cow, so lifelike it deceived the bull. From this unnatural union, Pasiphae gave birth to a child who was neither fully human nor entirely beast, a boy with the body of a human and the head and tail of a bull. They named him Asterion, though history would remember him by a different name, the Minotaur, which literally means the bull of Minos. The creature's existence was a constant, living reminder of the king's shame and the queen's disgrace. As the Minotaur grew, he became ferocious and uncontrollable, feeding on human flesh. King Minos could not bring himself to kill the beast, as it was, in a twisted way, his stepson. Yet he needed to contain this monstrous secret. Once again, he turned to the ingenious Daedalus, commanding him to build a prison so complex that the creature could never escape and no one who entered could ever find their way out. This was not merely a simple maze, but a convoluted prison, a building with countless winding corridors that changed direction constantly, designed to confuse and disorient all who walked its path. This immense, bewildering structure became known as the Labyrinth, a place of darkness and despair designed to hide the Minotaur and the shame of the royal family deep within its inextricable heart. But who was the mind behind this architectural marvel and this prison of shame? To answer that, we must turn our attention to Daedalus himself, a figure whose name became synonymous with genius and craftsmanship. Hailing from Athens, Daedalus was not merely a builder, he was an inventor, a sculptor so skilled that his statues were said to possess life. He was the epitome of human ingenuity, a man whose talent pushed the boundaries of what was thought possible. Yet, like many brilliant minds throughout history, his story is also one of tragedy and profound moral conflict. He didn't come to Crete as a free man seeking patronage, he was a fugitive. After a terrible incident in Athens involving his nephew and apprentice, Ptolos, whom he was said to have killed in a fit of jealous rage, Daedalus fled to the court of King Minos, seeking sanctuary. The king, recognizing the immense value of such a genius, gladly offered him protection, effectively making Daedalus the royal master craftsman. This relationship, however, was far from a simple partnership. Daedalus was both an esteemed artist and a trapped servant. His genius had secured him a position of prestige, but his past had cemented his dependence on the king's mercy. He lived in a gilded cage, obligated to use his unparalleled skills to fulfill Minos's every command, no matter how dark. This complex dynamic reached its peak with the construction of the Labyrinth. One can only imagine the turmoil Daedalus must have felt. Here was a man who represented the pinnacle of creation, the very essence of bringing ideas into form, now tasked with designing a monument to confinement and despair. He was ordered to create a building whose sole purpose was to conceal a terrible truth and doom whoever entered. The labyrinth was a perversion of his art, a masterpiece of confusion instead of clarity, of imprisonment instead of liberation. The moral dilemma for Daedalus was immense. His craft, which should have been a celebration of human achievement, was being used to enable a king's shame and hide a monstrous injustice. By building the labyrinth, he wasn't just following orders, he was becoming complicit in the ongoing tragedy of the Minotaur, a creature who was itself an innocent victim of the gods' cruelty and human folly. Every corridor he designed, every deceptive turn he plotted, was another layer in a prison that would eventually require human sacrifices to sustain its horrifying occupant. Daedalus used his intellect to solve an impossible problem of engineering, but in doing so, he was forced to suppress his own humanity and conscience. He became a prisoner himself, trapped by his debt to Minos and bound by the chains of his own extraordinary talent, which made him too valuable to ever be truly free. And so we come to the creature at the very heart of this dark tale, a being known to history only as a monster. But to see the Minotaur merely as a beast to be slain is to miss the profound tragedy of its existence. Born from a divine punishment it played no part in, the Minotaur, originally named Asterion, was a child of unnatural origins, a living testament to a king's broken oath and a queen's cursed desire. From its first breath, it was an abomination in the eyes of the world, a symbol of shame that needed to be hidden away. Consider its reality. It was not born in the wild, raised by instinct, but was instead a conscious being, likely aware of its own otherness, its own isolation. Imprisoned within the endless stone walls of the labyrinth, it knew no companionship, no kindness, no sunlight. Its entire world was a confusing, shadowy prison designed to ensure it could never be found and could never find its way out. The name given to it by history, Minotaur, literally means bull of Minos, defining it only by its connection to the king and its animalistic half. Its given name, Asterion, is often forgotten, a poignant detail that means starry one, perhaps a fleeting hope for a child that would never know a bright or open sky. This was not a mindless creature of pure instinct. Greek myths often imbue such beings with a level of consciousness, and we are left to wonder about the inner life of Asterion. Did it understand why it was alone? Did it feel the weight of its own unnaturalness, its violence and consumption of human flesh? The details that cement its monstrous legend can also be interpreted as the actions of a trapped, confused, and starving animal, one that was fed a terrible tribute of young lives, conditioning its hunger and its rage. In this light, the Minotaur becomes one of mythology's most tragic figures, a victim of circumstances far beyond its control. It did not ask to be born. It did not choose its form or its appetites. It was created by the actions of others: Poseidon's wrath, Minos' greed, Pasiphae's cursed passion, and Daedalus's compelled ingenuity, and then punished for its very existence. The labyrinth was not built to protect the world from a monster. It was built to hide a royal secret, to contain a living embarrassment. The Minotaur was as much a prisoner of the maze as those who were sent into it, a captive of its own bloodline and the shame of its family. Its eventual slaying by the hero Theseus is often celebrated as a triumph, but it also reads as a mercy killing, the final release of a creature that never had a chance at a life of peace or meaning, a being whose only crime was being born. So what did this infamous structure, this prison of legend, actually look like? Ancient sources offer us glimpses, though they often seem to describe something beyond a simple building. The historian Plutarch, writing centuries after the myth's origin, called it a structure which, through its tangled and winding passages, bewildered the eye and mind. It wasn't just a single spiral or a garden-variety hedge maze we might encounter today. The descriptions suggest a multi-leveled complex, a three-dimensional puzzle of endless corridors that doubled back on themselves, stairways leading nowhere, and identical passages designed to maximize disorientation. Its core purpose was psychological warfare against anyone who entered, eroding their sense of direction and hope with every step. The very word labyrinth came from the Minoan term labris, meaning a double-headed axe, a powerful religious symbol frequently found in the ruins of Crete. This wasn't just a name, it was a clue linking the mythical maze to the very real and sophisticated culture that inspired it. The genius of its design lay in its ability to confound not just the body but the mind. Unlike a maze which presents you with choices and dead ends, the classical labyrinth was often depicted as a unicursal path, a single, winding but non-branching route that leads inexorably to the center. This design is profoundly different and, in its own way, more terrifying. There are no decisions to make, no wrong turns to avoid. You are simply led, turn by turn, deeper into the heart of the complex, with the crushing realization that the only way out is to backtrack through that entire, confusing, and potentially perilous path. This unicursal design transforms the journey from a test of navigation into a test of nerve and memory, a slow, inevitable march toward a confrontation with whatever or whoever waits at the center. From an architectural standpoint, envisioning its construction boggles the mind. We're asked to imagine a colossal, enclosed edifice, likely built from stone, with high walls that prevented anyone from seeing over them or climbing out. The roofing alone would have been a monumental task, requiring ingenious techniques to span such a vast and intricate network of halls while keeping the interior plunged into a state of perpetual twilight, broken only by the flicker of torches. The acoustics within would have been eerie, with sounds echoing and distorting through the endless corridors, making it impossible to tell if a noise came from ahead, behind, or around the next corner. Every element was engineered to create a sense of utter isolation and inescapability. It was a building that was actively working against its inhabitants, a silent stone opponent. This brings us to a pivotal and haunting question. Could such a place have actually been built? While a structure of such mythical complexity might be exaggerated, its inspiration likely came from a very real source: the immense and sprawling palace complexes of the Minoan civilization on Crete. The archaeological site of Knossos, the primary palace of the Minoans, is a revelation when you walk its remains. It's not a single building but a vast, multi-story honeycomb of over 1,000 interconnecting rooms, courtyards, corridors, and stairwells spread across acres of land. For an outsider, or even for someone unfamiliar with its layout, navigating this complex would have been incredibly difficult. The corridors are narrow and twist unexpectedly. Rooms open into other rooms without clear logic, and the overall sense is one of beautiful confusion. It's easy to see how ancient visitors, perhaps from mainland Greece, would have been utterly bewildered by this advanced architectural wonder. To them, this was not a palace, it was a labyrinth. The grand courtyard could be reimagined as the center, and the countless dark, winding storage magazines and hallways could easily birth tales of a monstrous resident hidden deep within. The myth, then, may not be a description of a fantastical maze, but a storyteller's interpretation of a very real, awe-inspiring, and confusing piece of architecture they could scarcely believe was built by human hands. Meanwhile, across the sea in the powerful city-state of Athens, a young prince was coming of age under a shadow of grief and subjugation. Theseus, the son of King Aegeus, was raised in the coastal city of Troezen, unaware of his royal heritage until the day he came of age. His mother revealed his true parentage and instructed him to lift a great boulder to retrieve the tokens his father had left behind, a pair of sandals and a sword. This act of strength was his first step toward destiny, proving his worth and setting him on the path to Athens. His journey to his father's court was itself a series of heroic trials, as he chose the dangerous land route over the safe sea voyage, deliberately seeking out and defeating a rogues gallery of bandits and monsters that plagued the road. This established his character not as a prince seeking comfort, but as a champion of the people, a young man who actively sought out injustice to confront it. By the time he arrived in Athens, he was already a celebrated hero, but he walked into a city paralyzed by fear and mourning. The terrible price demanded by King Minos was coming due once again. As punishment for the death of his son, Minos had conquered Athens and imposed a gruesome tribute. Every 9 years, 7 young Athenian men and 7 young women were to be sent to Crete, cast into the labyrinth, and left to be devoured by the Minotaur. This cycle of sacrifice was a slow bleed on the city's spirit, a constant reminder of its powerlessness. When the ship with the black sails arrived to collect this heartbreaking tribute, Theseus witnessed the despair of his newfound people. He could not stand by. He immediately volunteered to be one of the 14, not as a victim, but as a would-be savior. He made a bold vow to his fearful father, King Aegeus. He would go to Crete, enter the labyrinth, slay the Minotaur, and put an end to the ghastly tribute forever. This was more than a simple quest for glory. It was a mission that embodied the very essence of the Greek heroic ideal. Theseus was not driven by a desire for treasure or a throne, but by a profound sense of responsibility and compassion for his people. He was willingly walking into what everyone believed was certain death to free them from a cycle of terror. His motivation was a powerful combination of filial duty to his father and king, and civic duty to the citizens of Athens. Before departing, he and his father agreed on a signal. The ship would sail with black sails as a sign of mourning for the victims, but if Theseus succeeded, he would change the sails to white on the return voyage, a beacon of hope that would signal his victory and safe return from the very heart of darkness. Yet for all his bravery, Theseus knew that courage alone would not be enough. The labyrinth was not a foe that could be defeated with a sword. It was a puzzle that demanded a different kind of strength. Entering its confusing passages without a plan would be a death sentence, rendering his vow to his father nothing but an empty promise. His salvation would come from an unexpected and deeply human source, not from a god or a weapon, but from a person who saw in him a chance for her own escape. In the court of King Minos, the Princess Ariadne watched the Athenian prisoners arrive. Among them, Theseus stood out immediately. Where the others walked in fear, he carried himself with a defiant confidence. Ariadne, like many in the palace, was living within a different kind of labyrinth, one of duty, isolation, and her father's oppressive rule. She found herself captivated by the foreign prince, and in that captivation she saw an opportunity. Moved by a powerful mix of compassion, infatuation, and a desperate desire to leave Crete behind, Ariadne made a fateful decision. She would help Theseus. Risking everything, she secretly went to him and offered a deal. If he would promise to take her away from Knossos and make her his wife in Athens, she would give him the means to conquer the inescapable maze. Theseus, faced with an impossible challenge, agreed to her terms. The tool she provided was deceptively simple, yet utterly brilliant. She handed him a ball of thread, a clue. Her instructions were clear. As he journeyed into the labyrinth, he must tie one end of the thread to the stone entrance and let the ball unwind behind him. This unbroken line would create a lifeline, a guaranteed path back through the confusion to the outside world. This was not a magic spell or a divine artifact. It was a stroke of pure, practical genius. It was a solution that used the labyrinth's greatest strength, its disorienting complexity, against itself. The maze could confuse the mind and the eye, but it could not break a physical tether. Ariadne's thread transformed an intellectual and psychological puzzle into a simple physical task. With this humble tool in hand, Theseus could now venture into the deepest darkness, focused solely on his goal, secure in the knowledge that he held the way home in his hand. It was a perfect metaphor for finding clarity in the face of overwhelming confusion, an idea that has resonated for millennia. We must also consider Ariadne's own labyrinth. As a princess, her life was one of gilded confinement. She was a pawn in her father's political games, her future likely destined for a strategic marriage that would strengthen his power. The myth hints that she may have been aware of the family's dark secret, living in the shadow of her half-brother, the Minotaur, and the shame it represented. Her aid to Theseus was therefore an act of tremendous rebellion. It was a betrayal of her father, her king, and her kingdom. She was not just helping a handsome hero, she was actively engineering the downfall of her father's monstrous legacy and securing her own escape from a predetermined future. Her motivation was a deeply human longing for agency and a different life. Theseus, armed with his sword and this ingenious guide, stepped into the labyrinth. The great stone door closed behind him, plunging him into a world of shadows and echoing silence. He faithfully tied the end of the thread and began to walk, the ball unraveling in his hand, leaving a thin but unbreakable connection to the world of the living. He navigated the endless identical corridors, the stairways that led in circles, and the deafening silence broken only by his own footsteps and from somewhere deep within, a low, bestial sound. He followed the sound and the thread deeper and deeper until he finally arrived at the heart of the maze. There, in the dimness, awaited the Minotaur. The battle was not a long, choreographed duel, but a brutal, primal struggle in the confines of the stone corridors. Theseus, using his strength and cunning, ultimately triumphed, slaying the creature and ending its tormented existence. The immediate threat was gone, but the task was only half complete. In the echoing silence, surrounded by the bones of previous victims, his success would mean nothing if he became lost. But he had the thread. He simply turned, picked up the line, and followed it back, retracing his steps through the bewildering paths with calm certainty. He emerged from the labyrinth into the sunlight, a conquering hero, the monster slain and his promise kept. His next actions, however, would set in motion a chain of consequences. True to his word, he fled Knossos immediately with Ariadne and the other Athenian youths, stealing away to their ship under the cover of the celebration for his presumed death. They set sail for Athens, their escape a whirlwind of relief and triumph. But the story of Ariadne does not end with a simple happily ever after. According to the most common version of the myth, their journey took them to the island of Naxos. Here, for reasons the ancient storytellers could never quite agree on, Theseus abandoned Ariadne while she slept on the beach. Some versions say he was ordered to do so by the god Dionysus, who claimed her for his own wife. Others suggest he simply left her, his passion cooled or his mind preoccupied with returning to Athens. Regardless of the reason, the princess who betrayed everything for love was left alone on a foreign shore. Her fate is a stark reminder that in these ancient tales, actions have complex and often painful repercussions. Her cleverness saved the hero, but it could not guarantee her own story would have a fairy tale ending. This grim cycle of sacrifice did not emerge from nothing. It was the brutal price of war and subjugation. The myth tells us that the tribute was imposed by King Minos as retribution for the death of his son, Androgeos, who was killed in Athens under suspicious circumstances. Some versions say he was murdered by rivals jealous of his athletic victories, while others claim he was sent on a suicidal mission to confront the Marathonian bull by King Aegeus himself. Whatever the cause, his death on Athenian soil gave Minos a righteous casus belli, a reason for war. The powerful Minoan navy, the master of the Aegean Sea, descended upon Athens. The city, unable to withstand such a force, was defeated and forced to accept the most horrifying terms of surrender imaginable. The demand for 14 of their finest young people was not just a punishment, it was a calculated act of political domination. It served multiple, devastating purposes for Minos. Firstly, it was a perpetual, living reminder of Athenian defeat. Every 9 years, the entire city would be plunged into mourning as the lottery selected the victims, ensuring that no generation could forget the power Crete held over them. Secondly, it was a method of demographic control, systematically culling the city's youth and weakening its future strength and morale. The psychological toll was immense. The promise of youth and the future of the city were literally being fed to a monster, creating an atmosphere of hopelessness and despair that crippled Athenian ambition. This dynamic reflects a potential historical truth buried within the layers of myth. The Minoan civilization, centered on Crete, was a thalassocracy, a sea empire, that wielded immense power across the Aegean during the Bronze Age. Archaeological evidence confirms that Minoan influence was profound, with their art, architecture, and goods found throughout the region, including in early Athens. It is entirely plausible that mainland Greek cities like Athens were required to send tribute to the powerful palace at Knossos. This tribute would have taken common forms of the era, precious goods, agricultural products, and perhaps even people. The myth of the human tribute could be a dramatic, exaggerated memory of this very real political and economic subjugation. The Minotaur itself might symbolize the consuming, terrifying, and seemingly insatiable nature of Minoan power as viewed from the mainland, a monstrous, distant force that demanded a continuous offering of wealth and people. For Athens, the tribute was the ultimate symbol of their powerlessness. They were not just defeated in a single battle, they were trapped in a cycle of terror with no apparent escape. The labyrinth was the perfect metaphor for their predicament, a confusing, inescapable system of oppression designed by a more advanced and cunning power. They were politically and militarily lost in a maze from which they could see no exit. This backdrop makes Theseus's decision to volunteer not just an act of heroism, but a radical political act. He was not merely facing a monster, he was challenging the entire power structure that kept his city in chains. His victory would mean more than just slaying a beast. It would be a declaration of Athenian independence, a severing of the Cretan yoke, and the first step toward the city's future greatness. The black-sailed ship was not just a vessel of mourning, it was a symbol of Athenian submission, and his promise to return with white sails was a vow to reclaim his city's honor and freedom. The heavy stone door ground shut behind them, and in an instant the world changed. The bright Cretan sun, the murmurs of the crowd, the very air of the living, all were gone, swallowed by an oppressive silence broken only by the ragged breathing of the 14 Athenians and the scuff of their feet on cold, dusty stone. They stood frozen in a twilight world, the only light coming from a few flickering torches mounted in sconces along the wall, their flames casting long, dancing shadows that made the walls themselves seem to shift and move. The air was heavy, stale, and carried a faint metallic scent that stuck in the back of the throat. Before them stretched a corridor, its end disappearing into a darkness so complete it felt solid. The walls were high and smooth, offering no handhold, no glimpse of any sky, creating a claustrophobic pressure that weighed on the soul. This was no simple maze, it was a sensory prison designed to dismantle the mind. Every whisper echoed, twisting and rebounding from unseen corners until it was impossible to tell if a sound came from ahead or behind. The groans of the ancient stonework sounded like a living thing settling around them. For the other tributes, this was the final confirmation of their doom. Their whimpers of fear, the soft, hopeless sobs of those who had already given up, these were the true sounds of the labyrinth, more terrifying than any roar. But Theseus moved with a purpose that set him apart. As the others huddled together, paralyzed by dread, he walked to the entrance and with a steady hand tied the end of Ariadne's thread to a protruding stone. The simple, practical act was a defiance of the maze's entire purpose. He held the ball of thread, this lifeline of logic and love, and began to walk forward, the line paying out behind him. His confidence was a tiny beacon in the overwhelming gloom, a silent command for the others to follow. Step by step, they ventured deeper, their small pocket of light pushing back against the consuming darkness, their world shrinking to the few feet illuminated by their trembling flames. The path was a masterwork of confusion. It curved without reason, forked unexpectedly, and often doubled back on itself in long, sloping declines that led only to identical, featureless intersections. There were no landmarks, no carvings, no changes in the stone, just an endless repetition of sameness designed to erase all sense of progress and time. A left turn would lead to a staircase descending into blackness, only to bring them back up to a corridor that felt hauntingly familiar. Was that the same crack in the wall they passed minutes ago? Or was the maze merely teaching them the language of despair? The constant, gentle tug of the thread in Theseus's hand was the only anchor to reality, the one fixed point in a universe of lies. And then the sounds began, not the obvious crash of a monster, but subtler, more psychologically devastating noises, a distant scrape of something heavy being dragged across stone. A low, guttural sigh that seemed to seep from the walls themselves, the scuttling of rats magnified by the echo into something far larger. The anticipation of the encounter became a torture in itself, every shadow at the edge of their vision threatening to coalesce into the beast they knew was waiting. The Minotaur was not just a physical creature in this place, it was the embodiment of the labyrinth's terror, a presence felt long before it was seen. Each step forward was a step toward a confrontation they both feared, and in a strange way longed for, just to end the agonizing wait. Theseus led them on, his own heart hammering not just with fear, but with a fierce, focused resolve. He was walking a path no one had ever walked twice, heading toward a fight that had claimed countless lives. The thread was his tether to Ariadne, to his father, to Athens, to hope itself. It was the physical manifestation of a promise, and he held onto it as tightly as he held the hilt of his sword. He was descending not just into the earth, but into the heart of a myth, and every sense was heightened, every nerve alive with the terrible, awesome knowledge that he was walking the line between legend and a gruesome death. The darkness ahead was not empty, it was waiting. At last, the winding corridor opened into a vast circular chamber, the absolute center of the labyrinth. The air here was thick and heavy, carrying the unmistakable, pungent smell of a beast and something older, the scent of dust, decay, and utter isolation. And there, in the dimness, stood the Minotaur. The creature was not merely waiting, it was rooted, a permanent, tormented feature of its own prison. It was larger than any man, its powerful human torso straining with muscle, topped by the massive, horned head of a bull. Its eyes did not hold the simple rage of an animal, but a deeper, more profound anguish, the confused pain of a being that knew only captivity and hunger. For a long, silent moment, hero and monster regarded each other, two opposites bound together by a fate engineered by gods and kings. The battle that followed was not the lengthy, elegant duel often depicted in later art. In the earliest versions of the myth, it was a brutal, desperate, and close-quarters struggle. Confined by the stone walls of the chamber, there was no room for grand strategy or heroic acrobatics. It was raw, physical, and horrifyingly intimate. Theseus, fueled by the hopes of his people and the promise he made to his father, would have had to rely on his strength, his courage, and the agility he honed on the road to Athens. The Minotaur, a creature of pure, unchecked instinct and power, charged with a force that could shatter stone, its bellows of rage and pain echoing through the labyrinth like a storm. In some accounts, the fight is over quickly, a single, well-placed thrust of the hero's sword. In others, it is a grueling test of endurance, a savage dance of death in the near darkness. But the outcome is always the same. Theseus triumphs. He slays the Minotaur, ending its miserable existence and breaking the curse that held Athens hostage. This act is far more than a simple monster slaying. It is one of the most potent symbols in all of mythology. On a literal level, it represents the conquering of a terrifying external threat. But on a psychological and metaphorical level, which is where the myth derives its enduring power, it speaks to the universal human struggle against our own inner demons. The labyrinth is not just a physical place, it is the confusing, twisting maze of our own minds, our fears, our anxieties, and our darkest impulses. Each of us has a labyrinth within. The Minotaur is the monstrous embodiment of the thing we fear most, the primal, seemingly uncontrollable part of ourselves that we often try to hide away our rage, our shame, our addiction, our grief. We build intricate psychological walls to contain it, hoping to never have to face it directly. Theseus, in this symbolic reading, represents our conscious will, our courage, our better nature that must eventually venture into that dark inner space to confront what we have locked away. Ariadne's thread is the crucial element in this metaphor. It is the tool of clarity and connection that allows us to navigate our own confusion. This thread can take many forms. It might be reason, love, faith, therapy, friendship, or a simple, disciplined plan. It is the thing we hold onto that keeps us grounded in reality and reminds us of who we are when we are at our most lost. It is the logical thought that counters the irrational fear, the supportive word from a friend that pulls us back from despair. Theseus could not have succeeded without it. The myth tells us that we cannot simply charge into our personal labyrinths armed only with brute force and hope to find our way out. We need a strategy, a lifeline, a connection to something outside of our own turmoil. The victory, then, is not the destruction of a part of ourselves, but the integration and mastery of it. The Minotaur is not a foreign invader. It is a part of the whole, born from a chain of choices and consequences. To slay it is to acknowledge its existence, to face it, and to ultimately refuse to let it control our lives anymore. It is the moment we stop being a prisoner to our own darkest corners and instead become the hero of our own story. This is why the myth has resonated for thousands of years. Every time a person confronts a deep-seated fear, breaks a bad habit, or seeks help for a problem they've hidden, they are reenacting the myth of Theseus in the labyrinth. They are finding their own thread, walking into their own darkness, and reclaiming their life from the monster within. With the Minotaur slain and its bellows silenced forever, a profound quiet fell over the labyrinth's heart. But the victory was hollow without escape. In the eerie stillness, surrounded by the shadows of countless lost souls, Theseus's true salvation was not his strength, but the slender, unbroken thread that lay coiled on the dusty floor. He carefully gathered it, and with the other Athenians following in a daze of relief and terror, he began to retrace his steps. Where the journey in was a descent into fear, the journey out was a quiet, solemn procession back to life. The thread, a mere piece of string, now felt like a golden cord pulling them from the underworld itself. Each turn and corridor passed with a building, almost unbearable hope until finally they saw it, a sliver of blinding Cretan sunlight around a distant corner. They stumbled out, gasping, into the open air, their eyes straining against the brightness, their skin warmed by a sun they never thought they would feel again. Their flight from Knossos was a frantic, whispered operation. The city, believing the sacrifices had been consumed, was likely in the midst of its customary 9-year celebration, a macabre festival marking the reaffirmation of Minos' power and the might of the Minoan throne. This atmosphere of revelry provided the perfect cover. Theseus, Ariadne, and the 13 other youths had to move quickly and silently to the harbor where their ship was beached. Ariadne was the key to this phase of the plan. Her knowledge of the palace's passages and the guards' routines allowed them to slip through the city like ghosts. One can only imagine the pounding of their hearts as they passed through the very courtyards where they had been paraded as prisoners just days before, now transformed into a band of fugitives stealing their freedom back from a tyrannical king. They reached the ship and pushed off into the dark waters of the Aegean, the sails catching a wind that must have felt like a gift from the gods themselves. As the lights of Crete faded into the horizon, a complex mix of emotions would have washed over the deck. For the Athenian youths, it was pure, unadulterated elation. They were alive, they were going home. They had witnessed the impossible and were now part of a story that would be told for generations. For Theseus, it was the culmination of his vow, the fulfillment of his heroic destiny. He had faced the ultimate monster and liberated his people, but for Ariadne, the reality was far more complicated. As she watched the island of her birth disappear, she was leaving behind everything she had ever known, her family, her title, her homeland, and her entire identity. She had committed the ultimate betrayal, defying her father, the king, and enabling the destruction of his monstrous secret. Her actions were driven by a potent cocktail of compassion for the victims, infatuation with the foreign hero, and a desperate, personal longing for a life beyond the gilded cage of the Knossos palace. In Theseus, she saw not just a man, but a vessel to a new world, a promise of autonomy and love. Her hope was as tangible as the thread she had provided, a lifeline to her own future. The journey was not a direct sail to Athens. Exhausted and needing supplies, they made landfall on the island of Naxos. It was here, on this peaceful shore, that the story takes its most tragic and debated turn. According to the most ancient and common versions of the myth, Theseus abandoned Ariadne while she slept. The specifics vary. Some say he was ordered to do so by the god Dionysus, who had chosen her for his own bride. Others suggest he was acting on a directive from Athena, and still others imply he simply sailed away, his passion cooled by the reality of the journey or his mind already fixed on his triumphant return to Athens. Regardless of the reason, the outcome was the same. Ariadne awoke alone on a foreign beach, watching the ship that carried her love and her dreams shrink to a speck on the vast, uncaring sea. The abandonment of Ariadne is one of the most human and heartbreaking moments in all of Greek mythology. It serves as a stark counterpoint to the clean, heroic narrative of the monster's defeat. Theseus, for all his courage and strength, is revealed to be flawed, perhaps even cruel. His action introduces a profound moral ambiguity into the tale. Was Ariadne merely a tool to be used and discarded once her purpose was served? Or was he a pawn himself, forced to obey the will of a capricious god? This moment reminds us that these stories are not about perfect paragons, but about complicated people whose victories often come with a heavy price paid by others. Ariadne's cleverness saved the hero, but it could not guarantee her a happy ending. Her fate, whether she became the immortal wife of Dionysus or lived out her days in mortal sorrow, forever tinges the victory with a shade of melancholy, a reminder that triumph and tragedy are often two sides of the same coin. While the world celebrated the triumph of Theseus, the brilliant mind behind the labyrinth remained trapped in the very gilded cage he had helped to build. Daedalus, the architect of the maze, found his fortunes taking a dark and desperate turn after the escape of the Athenians. King Minos was enraged, and his fury had a sharp and specific focus. He knew that only two people possessed the knowledge to navigate the labyrinth's secrets: the hero Theseus, who was now far at sea, and the man who had designed it. Theseus had escaped with his life, but he had also escaped with Minos' daughter, Ariadne. In the king's eyes, this was not merely the act of a rebellious princess. It was an inside job, a betrayal engineered by his own master craftsman. The thread that had guided the hero could only have come from one source: Daedalus. His once privileged status as the king's chief artisan evaporated in an instant. For the crime of aiding the enemies of Crete, a crime of compassion, rebellion, or perhaps simply a desire for his own freedom, Daedalus, along with his young son Icarus, was seized and imprisoned. Their prison was not a dank dungeon cell, but something far more psychologically cunning. Minos, understanding the nature of the man he held, locked them away in a high tower. It was a place with a view of the entire world. They were forbidden to touch the vast, sparkling expanse of the sea, the ships sailing to distant lands, the birds soaring on the thermals with a freedom that must have felt like a personal taunt. For a mind like Daedalus's, a mind that solved problems and built wonders, this was the ultimate torture: to be presented with the entire puzzle of escape and yet be denied all the pieces. But a genius cannot be caged so easily. As Daedalus watched the birds circle his tower, a radical, breathtaking idea began to take shape. If the sea was guarded by Minos' powerful navy, and the land was patrolled by his loyal soldiers, then there was only one path left to freedom: the sky. It was a domain ruled only by the gods, a place no mortal had ever dared to claim. The idea was the height of hubris, a direct challenge to divine law, but for a desperate father, it was the only hope he had to save his son. He began to study the birds with an artisan's intense focus, observing the elegant structure of their wings, the careful alignment of their feathers, and the way they caught the air to generate lift. Using the only materials available to him, discarded feathers dropped by birds that nested on the tower, scraps of cloth, and wax from the candles that lit their room, Daedalus set to work. He fashioned a framework, carefully tying feathers of different sizes in a careful, descending order from the largest to the smallest, mimicking the natural wing of a gull. He secured them to the frame with wax, creating two magnificent, sweeping pairs of wings, one set for himself and a smaller, matching set for Icarus. The project was a fusion of desperate innovation and tender care. Each feather was placed not just for function, but for the life of the boy who would wear them. When the wings were complete, he fastened them to his son's shoulders with a gravity that must have been overwhelming. This was not just another invention, it was a leap into the absolute unknown. He looked into Icarus's young, excited eyes and gave him the most crucial instructions of their lives. He explained the mechanics of flight, to follow his lead, to mimic his movements, to ride the currents of air. And then he gave the famous warning that would echo through millennia. He told his son that their path must be a middle course. If he flew too low, the dampness of the sea spray would weigh down the feathers and waterlog the wings, pulling him into the waves. But more dangerously, if he flew too high, too close to the burning heat of the sun, the wax that held their escape together would soften, melt, and fail. With a final, hopeful embrace, they stepped to the edge of the tower window and pushed off into the open air. For a heart-stopping moment, they fell, and then the wings caught the air. The sensation must have been pure, unadulterated ecstasy. After months of confinement, they were flying. The island of Crete spread out beneath them like a map, the tiny figures of soldiers and citizens looking up in astonishment at the two men who had conquered the sky. They were free. They soared over the sea, leaving the domain of Minos far behind, and for a while Icarus followed his father's guidance perfectly, a testament to Daedalus's genius and her father's love. But then something shifted in the young boy's heart. The initial fear was replaced by an incredible, intoxicating thrill. The feeling of power was absolute. He was no longer a prisoner or a mere boy. He was a god, climbing higher and higher on his own power. He began to play in the air, diving and swooping, pushing the limits of his new gift. He saw his father gesturing for him to descend, to return to the safe middle path, but the warning was lost in the rush of wind and the siren song of the sun. It beckoned him upward, promising a warmth and a brilliance greater than anything he had ever known. He climbed steadily, each beat of his wings taking him closer to the fiery orb, drunk on the joy of his own flight. High above the world, the heat began to change. The pleasant warmth became an intense, searing glare. The carefully applied wax, the very glue of their salvation, began to soften. A single feather slipped loose, then another, fluttering down toward the sea far below. Icarus, lost in his euphoria, barely noticed. Then a whole section of feathers tore free. The delicate balance of the wing was destroyed. The joy on his face turned to sudden, stark terror as he flailed, his movements becoming frantic and uncoordinated. He was no longer flying, he was falling. He cried out to his father, a single, piercing shout that was swallowed by the vastness of the sky, and then he plunged down into the deep blue waters of the sea that now bears his name, the Icarian Sea. Daedalus, hearing the cry, wheeled around in the air, but it was too late. He could only watch in helpless, heart-shattering horror as his son, his greatest creation and his reason for escaping, disappeared beneath the waves. The genius who had outwitted a king and conquered the sky could not save his own child from the consequences of a single, fatal mistake. He circled the spot where Icarus had fallen, but there was nothing to be found, no body, no wreckage, just a few scattered feathers floating on the water. The man who had built wings for a queen's unnatural passion and a prison for a monster had, in his greatest act of creation, engineered his own most profound tragedy. He flew on to Sicily alone, a broken man, his magnificent invention now a torturous reminder that the greatest human ingenuity is often no match for the simple, reckless, and beautiful folly of the human spirit. For centuries, the legend of the Labyrinth existed purely in the realm of myth, a captivating story told by poets like Homer. It was a tale without a place, a magnificent structure with no foundation in the archaeological record. That all changed at the dawn of the 20th century, when a determined English archaeologist named Sir Arthur Evans arrived on the sun-baked island of Crete. Intrigued by ancient scripts and artifacts being found on the island, Evans became convinced that Crete held the secrets of a prehistoric civilization far older than classical Greece. He began excavations at a large mound known as Kefala Hill, near the modern city of Heraklion, and what he unearthed would stun the world and forever change our understanding of the Labyrinth myth. What Evans's team discovered was not a simple ruin. It was the vast, sprawling, multi-story complex of the Palace of Knossos. This was not a fortified castle designed for defense, but a vibrant, elaborate administrative and religious center, the heartbeat of a civilization he dubbed Minoan in honor of the mythical King Minos. The sheer scale of the palace was breathtaking. It covered an area of over 20,000 square meters with an estimated 1,300 rooms spread across several levels, all connected by a mesmerizing network of corridors, staircases, and light wells. For the first time, the world could see a real, physical structure complex enough to have inspired the legend of the inescapable maze. Walking through the reconstructed remains today, it is incredibly easy to understand how this palace could have been perceived as a labyrinth by outsiders. The layout is intentionally irregular, a seemingly chaotic jumble of rooms that open into one another without clear pattern. Long, narrow corridors twist and turn abruptly, leading to small, darkened chambers or suddenly opening into grand, sunlit courtyards. Staircases crisscross, connecting different levels in a way that feels disorienting. You can easily imagine an ancient visitor from mainland Greece, accustomed to simpler, more linear buildings, becoming utterly lost within minutes. The constant need to choose a path at every intersection, only to find yourself back where you started or in a completely unexpected place, would have been a profoundly confusing and even unsettling experience. This architectural complexity was likely a deliberate display of Minoan sophistication and power, a way to awe and intimidate guests with the sheer ingenuity of their design. The connection goes even deeper than the floor plan. Throughout the excavated palace, one symbol appears again and again, painted on walls, carved into pillars, and preserved on ancient artifacts, the labyrinth or the double-headed axe. This was not a weapon of war, but a potent religious and ceremonial symbol, likely associated with a powerful mother goddess worshipped by the Minoans. The very word labyrinth is now widely believed by scholars to derive from this word, Labyrinth, meaning the house of the double axe. So the labyrinth was not necessarily a maze built to imprison a monster, but perhaps a sacred title for the palace itself. The magnificent, awe-inspiring, and confusing house of the double axe at Knossos. Over centuries, as the memory of the Minoan civilization faded into legend, the meaning of the word may have shifted. The house became a maze, and its sacred function was transformed into a story of monstrous imprisonment. The power of the Minoans was not just expressed in stone, it was projected across the sea. Archaeological evidence confirms that the Minoan civilization was a thalassocracy, a formidable sea empire that dominated the Aegean for centuries. Their vibrant art, advanced pottery, and distinctive artifacts have been found across the Greek mainland, proving their extensive trade networks and cultural influence. For the emerging, less sophisticated city-states like Mycenaean Athens, the Minoan civilization would have been a colossus immensely powerful, incredibly wealthy, and utterly mysterious. The regular demand for tribute in the form of goods and resources from the mainland to the palace at Knossos would have been a stark reality of life. The myth of the Athenian tribute of young people being sent to Crete could very well be a folk memory, a mythological encoding of this very real political and economic subjugation. The Minotaur, in this light, becomes a powerful symbol for the consuming, terrifying, and seemingly insatiable nature of Minoan power as viewed from the mainland, a monstrous, distant force that demanded a continuous offering of wealth and people. This new historical context doesn't diminish the myth, it enriches it beyond measure. It shows us that these stories were not invented from nothing. They were born from a seed of truth, from the awe and fear that a magnificent, advanced civilization inspired in its neighbors. The Palace of Knossos was a real labyrinth, not of stone designed to trap a beast, but of cultural and political power that captivated and confounded the ancient world. The genius of the storytellers was to take this reality and weave it into a timeless narrative about facing our deepest fears, navigating impossible challenges, and the eternal human struggle for freedom against overwhelming odds. The myth is the echo of a real, lost world, a whisper from the Bronze Age that has resonated for 3,000 years. The legend of the labyrinth might have remained a beautiful, unsubstantiated myth were it not for the obsessive passion of one man. At the dawn of the 20th century, Sir Arthur Evans, a wealthy and intellectually restless English archaeologist, arrived on Crete. He was drawn by rumors of mysterious, pre-alphabetic seals and artifacts being found by local farmers, and he became convinced that the island held the secrets of a civilization far older than classical Greece. In 1900, he used his personal fortune to purchase the entire site of Kefala Hill, and he began excavations that would consume the next 25 years of his life and fundamentally rewrite the history of the Mediterranean. What his team unearthed was nothing short of a Bronze Age metropolis. The The Palace of Knossos was not a single building but a vast, sprawling complex, an intricate honeycomb of over 1,300 rooms spread across multiple levels, connected by a bewildering network of corridors, staircases, grand courtyards, and magazines for storing vast quantities of oil, wine, and grain. For Evans, this was the undeniable physical proof of the Minoan civilization he named after the mythical king Minos. He saw in the complex layout the very source of the labyrinth myth. To walk through the site was to experience a sense of disorientation so profound that it was easy to believe one could be lost forever within its walls. The sheer architectural sophistication, with its advanced drainage systems, light wells, and vibrantly painted walls, spoke of a power and culture that would have seemed almost supernatural to the later, less advanced Mycenaean Greeks. Driven by a powerful vision to make the past come alive, Evans embarked on an ambitious and, to modern eyes, highly controversial reconstruction project. He didn't just excavate the ruins, he rebuilt them. Using concrete and steel, his team reconstructed entire sections of the palace, including the grand staircase, the throne room, and many of the famous columns, which he painted a bold, dark red. He commissioned vivid recreations of the magnificent frescoes, the lithe bull leapers, the elegant Parisian lady, the serene dolphins, and placed them on the walls where fragments of the originals were found. His goal was philanthropic and spectacular, to create an immersive experience where visitors could truly feel the grandeur of Minoan culture, to walk through the labyrinth not as a ruin but as a living space. However, this very reconstruction is the source of intense debate among archaeologists today. Critics argue that Evans, a man of his Victorian era, often let his own imagination and cultural biases shape his interpretation of the ruins. His reconstructions are now seen by many as speculative, permanently cementing one man's vision of the past onto the archaeological record. For instance, his designation of certain rooms as throne rooms or religious sanctuaries is based on interpretation, not incontrovertible fact. He envisioned the Minoans as a peaceful, matriarchal society, governed by a priest-king and devoted to a mother goddess, largely free from the militaristic impulses he attributed to later civilizations. This romantic view has been challenged by subsequent findings that suggest a society more complex and perhaps more familiar in its exercise of power, including evidence of fortifications and potential internal conflict. His most significant interpretation, and the one most relevant to our story, was his unwavering conviction that the Palace of Knossos was the historical basis for the labyrinth. He argued that the complex, multi-leveled layout, so confusing to outsiders, naturally gave rise to the legend. Furthermore, the recurring symbol of the double-headed axe, the labyrinth, carved into the very stones of the palace, provided a direct linguistic link. The labyrinth, he proposed, was simply the House of the Double Axe, a name that evolved over centuries of storytelling into the myth of the impenetrable maze. While later scholars have offered other interpretations suggesting the labyrinth could represent a ritual dance path or a symbolic journey, Evans's core idea remains powerfully compelling. He gave the myth a place, a history, and a breathtaking scale, transforming a tale of monsters and heroes into a tantalizing echo of a very real, magnificent, and lost world. His work, for all its controversy, ensured that the legend of the labyrinth would forever be rooted in the stones of Crete. This powerful symbol of the labyrinth, born in the Bronze Age, did not remain confined to ancient myths or the stones of Knossos. It wove itself into the very fabric of human creativity, becoming a timeless motif in art and literature, constantly reinterpreted to reflect the fears and fascinations of each new era. Some of the earliest depictions we have are on ancient Greek pottery, where the story was a popular theme. On these vibrant vases and kylixes, we see artists capturing key moments of the drama. One common scene shows Theseus in combat with the Minotaur, a dynamic and often surprisingly intimate struggle, the hero's muscles straining as he overpowers the beast. Another frequent depiction is the aftermath, showing the Athenian youths and maidens dancing in a circle with Theseus, a celebration of their deliverance. This circular dance itself, known as the Geronos or crane dance, was said to have been invented by Theseus on Crete to mimic the winding, coiling path of the labyrinth he had just escaped. It's a beautiful thought that the movement of the body could tell the story of the maze, turning terror into art and communal celebration. The metaphor of the labyrinth evolved profoundly as it moved from the pagan world into the spiritual framework of the Middle Ages. For medieval Christians, the maze was stripped of its monstrous Minotaur and transformed into a potent symbol of the soul's difficult journey toward God. Many great Gothic cathedrals, most famously the one at Chartres in France, feature intricate labyrinth designs set into their stone floors. These were not puzzles to be solved for fun. They were spiritual tools known as Chemin de Jérusalem, or the road to Jerusalem. For pilgrims who could not undertake the dangerous journey to the Holy Land, walking the path of the labyrinth on their knees in prayer was a substitute pilgrimage, a physical act of devotion and penance. The single, winding path to the center represented the long, twisting road of a human life, with its trials and turns, all leading toward a divine encounter at the center. Reaching the center was a moment of grace and clarity, after which you would retrace your steps back into the world, spiritually renewed. This sacred use completely redefined the labyrinth from a place of fear and entrapment to one of contemplation and purposeful journey. The Renaissance saw a reawakening of interest in classical myths, and the labyrinth returned to its more secular but equally complex roots. Artists were drawn to the human drama of the story. The great Italian painter Dante Gabriel Rossetti captured a poignant moment in his work Ariadne, focusing not on the hero but on the abandoned princess, her face a mask of despair and betrayal as she watches Theseus's ship vanish. This shift in focus highlights the era's growing interest in complex human emotions and the consequences of heroic actions. The story offered everything a Renaissance artist loved: a heroic nude in Theseus, a tragic beauty in Ariadne, a monstrous creature, and a dazzling architectural setting. It was a perfect vehicle for demonstrating skill in depicting the human form, emotion, and fantastical design, ensuring its place as an enduring subject in the canon of Western art. In our modern era, the labyrinth has been internalized. It has moved from physical spaces into the dark corridors of the human mind. Writers and filmmakers have masterfully used the concept to represent psychological turmoil, obsession, and the terrifying maze of mental illness. A quintessential example is Stephen King's novel The Shining and Stanley Kubrick's iconic film adaptation. The Overlook Hotel is a classic Gothic labyrinth, a vast, isolated building with long, identical hallways, endless rooms, and a disturbing history that seems to warp its very geometry. But the true maze is not made of hedge or hotel carpet. It is the deteriorating mind of Jack Torrance. The hotel mirrors his descent into madness, its corridors echoing with the ghosts of his own rage and addiction, leading him inexorably to violence against his family. The famous hedge maze in the film version becomes a brilliant physical manifestation of this inner chaos, a trap for both Jack and his son Danny, where the real monster is not a beast at the center, but the fractured human pursuing them. This psychological application shows the incredible versatility of the symbol. The labyrinth is no longer just a building you enter, it is a state of being you can't escape. It appears in stories of BOUT, Chinese letter, Chinese letter, Chinese letter, Chinese letter, and paranoia. From the endlessly shifting stairs of Hogwarts to the bureaucratic nightmares of Franz Kafka, where characters find themselves trapped in systems so complex and illogical they become inescapable psychological mazes. Jorge Luis Borges, the master of metaphysical short stories, was utterly obsessed with the idea, writing about infinite libraries and circular ruins that are labyrinths of the intellect, puzzles that trap the mind rather than the body. This evolution proves the symbol's enduring power. From a mythical prison for a monster, to a path for pilgrims, to a map of madness, the labyrinth continues to be a powerful way for us to articulate our deepest anxieties about getting lost, being trapped, and the perpetual human struggle to find our way toward meaning, salvation, or simply a way out. And so we see that the labyrinth is far more than an ancient architectural puzzle. It is a profound and enduring metaphor that has mapped itself onto the deepest contours of the human experience. Its winding, confusing path is a mirror for our own journey through life, reflecting our struggles with confusion, purpose, and the search for meaning. This symbolic power is why the image of the maze has transcended its mythological origins to become a universal symbol, speaking to us across cultures and centuries about the nature of existence itself. On the most fundamental level, the labyrinth represents the journey of life with all its unexpected twists and turns. We are all born into a world we did not choose, and we must navigate a path forward without a map. We encounter forks in the road, dead ends that force us to backtrack, and moments of disorientation where we feel utterly lost. The high walls of the maze are the limitations and challenges we face, our circumstances, our fears, the expectations of others, which block our view of the bigger picture and make it difficult to see where we are headed. This can feel isolating and terrifying, as if we are wandering alone in the dark. Yet, the myth offers a crucial piece of hope. The path, however confusing, is universal. It does have a center, it does have an exit. This suggests that our lives, for all their apparent chaos, are not without direction or purpose. The journey itself, with all its trials and errors, is not a mistake but the entire point, the process that shapes and defines us. Psychologically, the labyrinth is a powerful representation of our own inner world, the complex and often bewildering maze of the human mind. Each of us has a hidden interior landscape of memories, desires, traumas, and fears. We build corridors to lock away painful experiences. We create loops of anxious thought that lead us in circles, and we often feel trapped by patterns of behavior we can't seem to break. The Minotaur waiting at the center is not an external monster, but the embodiment of our own shadow self, the repressed, denied, or frightening aspects of our own psyche that we have tried to hide away. Confronting this inner Minotaur is the essential work of self-discovery and healing. It requires immense courage to venture into those dark places, to face our rage, our grief, or our shame. But the myth assures us that this confrontation is necessary for liberation. We cannot simply wall off parts of ourselves and hope to be free. We must integrate them to become whole. This journey inward is also a spiritual quest. Across traditions, the path to enlightenment or divine connection is rarely described as a straight line. It is a winding road of faith, doubt, devotion, and awakening. The medieval pilgrims walking the cathedral labyrinths on their knees understood this intimately. Their physical journey mirrored the soul's arduous trek toward God, a path requiring patience, humility, and unwavering faith that the moment of grace, would be reached. The labyrinth, in this sense, becomes a mandala, a sacred pattern that guides the seeker through a ritual of transformation. The act of walking it is a form of meditation in motion, a letting go of the need to control and a trusting surrender to the path itself. Reaching the center is not a final destination, but a moment of clarity and connection before returning to the everyday world, transformed by the experience and carrying that peace back into the maze of daily life. Ultimately, the labyrinth is a story about personal transformation. Theseus does not enter the maze as the same person who leaves it. He enters as a brave but perhaps brash young prince. He emerges as a true hero and a leader, having faced ultimate terror and survived. The maze itself is the agent of that change. It is the challenging, refining fire that forges his character. Our own personal labyrinths, the difficult periods of loss, uncertainty, and struggle function in the same way. They are not meaningless suffering to be endured, but transformative crucibles. It is in the moments when we are most lost, when our old maps fail us, that we are forced to discover new strengths, new resources, and a deeper resilience we never knew we possessed. We find our own version of Ariadne's thread, that which connects us to our core identity, our values, or our loved ones, and we hold on tightly, allowing it to guide us through the darkness. The most beautiful lesson the Labyrinth teaches is that we are not meant to navigate it alone. Theseus had Ariadne's thread. The medieval pilgrims had their faith and their community. We have our own threads, the love of family, the guidance of mentors, the support of friends, the wisdom found in art and literature, or the insights from therapy. These connections are our lifelines, the things that keep us grounded when we feel untethered by life's complexities. They remind us who we are and where we belong when the path becomes confusing. The myth assures us that seeking help is not a weakness but the wisest strategy of all. It is the collaborative act of holding the thread for another, or allowing them to hold it for us, that makes the bewildering journey not just endurable but meaningful. The labyrinth, therefore, is not a prison but a teacher. Its challenges are not punishments but invitations to grow, to understand, and to ultimately find our way home to our most authentic selves. But to truly appreciate the genius and the terror of the Minotaur's prison, we need to make a crucial distinction that often gets lost in translation. In our modern language, we tend to use the words labyrinth and maze interchangeably, but for the ancient Greeks and for scholars of myth, they represent two profoundly different concepts. This isn't just a matter of semantics. Understanding this difference completely changes how we interpret the myth and the psychological weight of Theseus's task. A maze, or what scholars call a multicursal path, is a puzzle. It's a network of branching paths filled with dead ends, wrong turns, and choices. When you enter a hedge maze at a garden festival, the challenge is intellectual. You must constantly make decisions, remember your route, and use logic and perhaps a bit of luck to find your way to the center and then back out again. It's a test of your problem-solving skills. The classical labyrinth, by contrast, is unicursal. It has only a single, winding, non-branching path. From the moment you step inside, the route is predetermined. There are no choices to make, no junctions to ponder. You simply follow the path as it twists and turns, coils and doubles back on itself, leading you on an inevitable, meandering journey to the center. This might sound simpler, but in many ways it's a far more terrifying and psychologically complex structure. The challenge isn't one of navigation or intellect, it's one of faith, patience, and nerve. You are not fighting the puzzle itself, but the crushing despair that comes from the realization that you are on a fixed track, being led deeper and deeper into a heart of darkness with no way to deviate. Your only hope of escape is to turn around and meticulously retrace every single step of that long, confusing path back to the beginning, all while potentially being pursued. It's a slow, inexorable journey into the unknown. This distinction is vital for the myth. King Minos didn't need a puzzle, he needed a prison. He needed a structure that would guarantee disorientation and despair. A multicursal maze with its many choices offers a sliver of hope. A wrong turn might lead to a dead end, but the next choice could be the right one. The unicursal labyrinth offers no such hope. It is a journey of relentless inevitability. For the Athenian tributes, this meant there was no moment of decision, no frantic racing down corridors trying to find an exit. Their walk was a slow, grim procession to their doom, a passive surrender to the winding path. For the Minotaur, it was an inescapable world with no corners to hide in, no forks to explore, just the endless, monotonous circuit of its own confinement. When we reimagine the story with this architectural truth in mind, Ariadne's gift of thread becomes even more brilliant. In a branching maze, a ball of thread would still be useful, but its primary function would be to mark which paths you've already tried and failed. In a unicursal labyrinth, the thread serves a different, more profound purpose. It doesn't help you choose between paths because there are no choices. Instead, it provides absolute certainty. It is a physical manifestation of memory and connection. As Theseus walked that single, winding path, the thread wasn't just behind him. It was a tangible, unbroken line tethering him directly to the world outside, to Ariadne and to hope itself. He could focus entirely on the confrontation ahead, secure in the knowledge that the way out was not a matter of chance or choice, but a simple, physical fact he could follow with his hands. The thread transformed the labyrinth from an inescapable psychological trap into a simple, linear journey he could reverse. This subtle shift in our understanding, from a puzzle of many choices to a path of one inevitable route, deepens the myth's power, making it less a story about outsmarting a maze and more a universal parable about finding a lifeline in the face of overwhelming fate. While the story of the Minotaur's labyrinth is the most famous, this powerful symbol of a confusing, sacred, or perilous path is a truly global phenomenon, appearing in the myths and architecture of cultures separated by vast oceans and centuries. The human fascination with winding, circuitous journeys seems to be a universal thread in our collective consciousness. One of the most compelling parallels comes from ancient Egypt, as described by the Greek historian Herodotus, who claimed to have witnessed it himself. In the 5th century BC, Herodotus wrote of a massive Egyptian labyrinth located near Lake Moeris, which he declared to be a wonder surpassing even the Great Pyramids. He described an enormous complex with 3,000 rooms, 1,500 above ground, and an equal number of subterranean chambers arranged in a vast, intricate circuit that was so confounding he insisted no stranger could find their way through it without a guide. This was not a prison for a monster, but a grand religious and administrative center, likely meant to represent the complex, winding journey of the soul in the afterlife. For Herodotus, this was proof that the concept of the labyrinth was older and grander than the Greek version, a magnificent architectural reality that may have even inspired the myths of his own people. Venturing into northern Europe, we find the turf labyrinth, a design carved into the ground and found from the British Isles to Scandinavia and Russia. These are not buildings but intricate patterns, often called Troy towns or Julian's bowers, traced into the earth with stones or low earthen walls. The most famous of these designs is the classical 7-circuit Cretan pattern, identical to the one that appears on ancient Greek coins from Knossos. The purpose of these northern labyrinths is shrouded in time, but scholars and folklorists suggest they served a variety of ritualistic functions. They may have been used for ceremonial dances to ensure fertile soil and a good harvest, their winding path symbolizing the turning of the seasons. Some theories propose they were used as symbolic pilgrimages for those who could not travel to Jerusalem, much like the cathedral labyrinths of the medieval period. Others suggest they were believed to trap evil spirits, the confusing paths preventing malevolent forces from reaching the center, or even as a test of faith and a protection for coastal villages, where walking the pattern was thought to ensure favorable winds for fishing boats. Turning to the indigenous cultures of North America, we encounter a different but spiritually parallel concept, the medicine wheel. While not a labyrinth in the classical winding sense, the medicine wheel serves a similar symbolic purpose as a sacred, circumscribed path for ritual and contemplation. Typically constructed as a circle of stones with spokes radiating from a central cairn, the medicine wheel is a map of the cosmos and the self. Walking its path is a meditative, spiritual practice that connects the individual to the 4 directions, the elements, and the cycles of life. It is a tool for healing, prayer, and gaining wisdom, representing the journey of life with its different stages and lessons. Like the universal labyrinth, there is often a single, prescribed way to walk it, a ritualized journey that leads the walker to a state of higher understanding and harmony at its center. The path isn't meant to confuse, but to focus and orient the walker within the larger universe. What is truly remarkable is how these similar concepts emerged independently across the world. From the sun-baked stones of Egypt to the green turf of England and the sacred plains of North America, humanity has repeatedly created these symbolic pathways. This points to a deep, shared psychological need. The labyrinth, in all its forms, appears to be an archetype, a primordial symbol buried in the human psyche that gives form to our most fundamental experiences. It gives tangible shape to our internal struggles, representing the confusing journey of life with its twists, turns, and setbacks. It provides a framework for our spiritual seeking, offering a physical path to walk as we search for meaning, center, and connection with the divine. And perhaps most importantly, it symbolizes the transformative journey of the hero, or the every person, who must navigate immense challenges and confront what lies at the heart of the maze to emerge changed and empowered. This global recurrence suggests that the labyrinth is not merely a story. It is a fundamental human tool for understanding our place in a complex and often bewildering universe. This ancient symbol of the winding path did not fade away with the myths of the ancient world. Instead, it experienced a powerful and poignant revival, transforming from a tale of monstrous imprisonment into a tool for peace, meditation, and community connection in our modern era. The journey of the labyrinth's return begins not with archaeologists, but with people seeking a tangible way to navigate the complexities of the human spirit. One of the most magnificent and influential examples has stood for centuries right in the heart of France. The Great Chartres Cathedral, built in the 13th century, features an immense labyrinth laid into the stone of its floor, measuring over 40 feet in diameter. For medieval pilgrims who could not make the dangerous journey to the Holy Land, this was their road to Jerusalem. They would walk its 11 concentric circuits on their knees, a physical act of prayer and devotion that mirrored the soul's long and difficult journey toward God. The path was not a puzzle to be solved, but a spiritual tool for contemplation, its single, winding route leading inevitably to a center seen as a place of grace and clarity. For centuries, this sacred function was the labyrinth's primary role, a quiet tradition preserved within the walls of great churches. The modern revival of this practice can be largely credited to an extraordinary man named Dr. Laurent Artras, who in the early 1990s served as a canon at San Francisco's Grace Cathedral. Feeling a sense of spiritual restlessness and seeking a more experiential form of worship, she traveled to Chartres and was profoundly moved by walking the ancient labyrinth there. She saw in its pattern a powerful, non-denominational tool that could speak to the anxiety and pace of contemporary life. Upon returning to Grace Cathedral, she undertook a monumental project. She had a 36-foot canvas replica of the Chartres labyrinth painted and laid out on the floor of the cathedral for people to walk. The public response was instant and overwhelming. People from all walks of life, of all faiths and of no particular faith, came to walk the path. They found in its gentle, mandatory turns a rare space for quiet reflection, a way to quiet the mind's constant chatter, and a metaphor for their own life's journey. This single act at Grace Cathedral sparked a movement that would ripple across the globe, moving the labyrinth from the exclusive domain of historical churches into hospitals, parks, schools, and community centers. Today, you can find labyrinths in some of the most unexpected and beautiful places. They are no longer confined to dark cathedral floors, but are woven into the very landscape of our communities. Many are constructed in public parks and gardens, crafted from river stones, low-growing herbs like thyme, or simply mown into a grassy field. These outdoor labyrinths offer a different experience entirely, connecting the walker not only to their own thoughts but to the natural world. The feel of the sun, the sound of birds, the smell of damp earth. Hospitals and wellness centers have also embraced the labyrinth as a powerful tool for healing. For patients undergoing stressful treatments, for family members waiting for news, or for nurses and doctors dealing with immense pressure, a walk along the labyrinth's path offers a few minutes of focused calm. It provides a way to physically step away from the anxiety of illness and toward a center of peace, reducing blood pressure and calming the nervous system in a way that feels active yet requires no special instruction or belief. The appeal lies in its beautiful simplicity. Unlike a maze which challenges the intellect with dead ends and choices, a labyrinth presents no wrong turns. There is only a single path to follow. This universal design is its greatest gift. It removes the pressure of decision-making and the fear of failure. You cannot get lost. Your only task is to put one foot in front of the other and follow the winding way. This act becomes a moving meditation, a way to quiet the busy mind. The rhythm of walking, the focus on the path ahead, allows deeper thoughts and feelings to surface naturally. For some, the walk to the center is a time to release worries and let go of burdens. Time spent at the center can be a moment of clarity, prayer, or simply being present. The walk back out then becomes a process of integrating that peace and carrying it back into the world. It is a personal journey that means something different to everyone. A veteran finding solace from trauma, a student seeking focus before an exam, a grieving person looking for comfort, or simply someone enjoying a quiet walk on a sunny afternoon. The labyrinth does not demand, it simply offers a path, and every person who walks it finds their own meaning along the way. This powerful symbol of the winding path has not remained a relic of ancient myth or sacred architecture. It has confidently marched into the heart of our modern storytelling, finding a profound and lasting home in contemporary media. The labyrinth continues to be a potent metaphor for filmmakers, game developers, and musicians, who use its imagery to explore themes of confusion, choice, and confronting the monsters within our own world. One of the most visually stunning and emotionally resonant examples is Guillermo del Toro's masterpiece, Pan's Labyrinth. This film brilliantly intertwines the brutal reality of post-Civil War Spain with a dark fairy tale, using the labyrinth as the literal and figurative bridge between these two worlds. The young heroine, Ophelia, is given a series of tasks by the mysterious faun, and her journey repeatedly brings her to an ancient, overgrown stone labyrinth. This isn't a maze of branching choices, but a classical universal path that leads her to a small stone altar at its center, a place of pivotal, life-altering decisions. Del Toro uses the labyrinth not as a puzzle to be solved, but as a sacred, liminal space where the rules of the real world fall away and a child's courage and purity are tested against ancient, immoral forces. The monster she must face, the Pale Man, waits not in the labyrinth itself but in a separate feast hall, yet the entire quest is framed by the labyrinth's twisting, leafy walls, suggesting that her entire reality has become a dangerous and confusing maze from which only a moral choice can provide an escape. The interactive nature of video games provides a uniquely personal medium for the labyrinth experience, placing the player directly into the role of Theseus. The God of War series, particularly its soft reboot in 2018, masterfully employs this concept. The protagonist, Knossos, is a man trapped in the labyrinth of his own past, a brutal history of rage, violence, and loss that he desperately tries to outrun for the sake of his son. This internal maze is externalized in the form of the Temple of Tyr, a multidimensional structure hidden beneath the Lake of Nine. This temple is a breathtaking feat of virtual architecture, a shifting puzzle box of a building that requires players to physically manipulate entire sections to open new pathways. Unlike a simple corridor, this labyrinth demands active participation. The player must engage their intellect to reorient entire rooms, making them a co-architect of their own path. It is a perfect metaphor for Knossos' journey. He cannot simply fight his way through his trauma. He must slowly, painstakingly, and intelligently work to reorient his entire world, to find a way forward for himself and his child. The puzzles within are not distractions but the core of the narrative, representing the difficult cognitive work required to navigate a path out of a painful past. Beyond these specific examples, the concept of the labyrinth is foundational to entire genres of gaming. Roguelike games such as Hades or The Binding of Isaac are built upon the principle of a randomly generated labyrinth for each playthrough. Every time the player character dies, they are thrust back to the beginning, only to face a completely new, unpredictable layout. This captures the Sisyphean frustration and adaptive challenge of the original myth, where no single map can guarantee success, and mastery comes not from memorization but from resilience and the ability to think on one's feet. Similarly, the sprawling, interconnected worlds of iconic Metroidvania games like Hollow Knight or the Dark Souls series are themselves massive, intricate labyrinths. These games gate progress not with locked doors but with player skill and acquired abilities, creating a world that feels initially impenetrable and overwhelming. The profound sense of accomplishment in these games comes from the slow, meticulous process of mentally mapping this treacherous world, turning a place of terror and confusion into a known and conquered space, a direct parallel to the psychological victory Theseus achieves. Even the world of music has drawn from the labyrinth's deep well of symbolism. The British progressive rock band Yes created a sprawling, 22-minute musical epic titled Close to the Edge, which features a section directly called The Labyrinth. The composition itself is a musical maze with complex time signatures, shifting tempos, and intricate instrumental passages that mimic the feeling of navigating a complex, winding path, challenging the listener to find their way through the sonic complexity to the melodic resolution. On a more lyrical level, the immensely popular K-pop group BTS has consistently used labyrinthine imagery throughout their discography to articulate the anxieties and confusion of young adulthood. In their song, Maze of Memories, they rap explicitly about feeling trapped in the maze of their own thoughts and the pressures of fame, searching for an exit. This modern application shows the metaphor's incredible flexibility. For a new generation, the labyrinth is no longer a mythical stone prison, but the internal, psychological maze of mental health, social expectation, and the daunting task of finding one's identity in a complex world. This enduring presence across all forms of media proves that the labyrinth is far more than an ancient story. It is a fundamental framework through which we continue to understand and narrate the most challenging and transformative journeys of our lives. This ancient symbol of the winding path has found a powerful new purpose far beyond the walls of cathedrals or the pages of myth, emerging as a profound tool in the modern practices of therapy and mindfulness. The labyrinth's journey into the realm of psychological healing is a natural evolution of its symbolic power, offering a unique, embodied practice for managing the complexities of the modern mind. In a world often defined by speed, distraction, and constant stimulation, the labyrinth provides a rare space for slowing down, turning inward, and engaging in a form of walking meditation that is both accessible and deeply transformative. It is not used to confuse or trap, as in the old myths, but to guide and focus, offering a structured path for the unstructured wanderings of our thoughts and emotions. The therapeutic application of the labyrinth is built upon a simple yet profound premise. The body and mind are intimately connected, and physical movement can be a direct pathway to mental and emotional release. Unlike traditional seated meditation, which can be challenging for those who find stillness difficult, walking a labyrinth is an active, participatory process. The act of placing one foot in front of the other on a predetermined path frees the cognitive mind from the task of navigation. There are no decisions to make, no wrong turns to fear. This single, winding route becomes a metaphor for surrendering control, allowing the walker to release the need to direct every moment and instead simply experience the journey as it unfolds. This physical surrender often catalyzes a psychological one, where anxious thoughts, obsessive planning, and the burden of constant choice can begin to soften and fall away with each step. Within clinical and wellness settings, labyrinths are increasingly utilized as a complementary tool for stress reduction and trauma recovery. Therapists might incorporate a labyrinth walk as a somatic therapy technique, helping clients who hold trauma or anxiety in their bodies to literally move through it in a safe, contained environment. The path to the center can represent a journey into the core of one's feelings, a space to acknowledge and sit with difficult emotions without being overwhelmed by them. The guaranteed return path then offers a powerful metaphor for reintegration, the reassuring knowledge that one can visit these deep places and still find their way back to the everyday world, having processed something difficult but remaining grounded and whole. For individuals dealing with grief, the rhythmic, meditative walk can provide a container for profound sadness, a ritual that honors the winding, non-linear nature of the healing process itself. On a broader scale, the practice of walking the labyrinth is a powerful exercise in mindfulness, a way to anchor awareness firmly in the present moment. The focus required to follow the path's gentle curves acts as a gentle tether, pulling attention away from ruminations about the past or anxieties about the future and into the immediate sensory experience, the feeling of feet on the ground, the sound of birdsong or rustling leaves, the rhythm of one's own breath. This practice of sensory anchoring is a core skill in mindfulness-based stress reduction, and the labyrinth provides a beautiful physical framework for cultivating it. The journey becomes a moving mantra, a meditation not on a single word or phrase, but on the act of trustful movement itself, training the mind to stay present and engaged. The ultimate psychological gift of the labyrinth may be its role as a tool for self-reflection and mental clarity. The structure of the walk often mirrors the process of working through a problem. The initial steps into the labyrinth can represent the first foray into a confusing issue, the winding path, the complex process of turning it over and examining it from different angles. Reaching the center provides a natural pause, a moment of arrival and potential insight where things can suddenly seem clearer, simpler, or more focused. The walk back out then becomes a time of integration, of carrying that newfound clarity or resolution back into one's life. People often emerge from a labyrinth walk with a sense of calm perspective, having unconsciously untangled a mental knot simply by allowing their body to follow a path that their mind needed to see. In this way, the labyrinth continues its ancient work, no longer as a prison for monsters, but as a gentle guide for anyone seeking to navigate the intricate and beautiful maze of their own inner world. Of course, the discovery of the sprawling palace of Knossos provided a tantalizingly plausible real-world counterpart to the mythical labyrinth, but it did not put an end to the debate. In many ways, it ignited an even more fascinating and complex discussion among historians and archaeologists. The central question remains, was the labyrinth a purely mythical invention, a symbol born from the imagination of poets, or was it inspired by a genuine, awe-inspiring structure that visitors from less sophisticated cultures could only describe as an inescapable maze? The evidence points in several compelling directions, and the academic world is far from a consensus, leading to a vibrant and ongoing dialogue that continues to shape our understanding of the Minoan. One compelling school of thought argues that the legend is a classic case of what scholars call etiology, a myth created to explain the origin of a word, a custom, or a place. In this view, the Greeks of later centuries encountered the vast, ruined complex of Knossos, a site already ancient and mysterious to them. They saw the recurring symbol of the double-headed axe, the labyrinth, carved into the crumbling walls. They may have heard whispers of the site's old name or its association with a powerful king. Connecting these dots, they could have forged the story. The house of the double axe, the Labyrinthos, must have been a maze, and a maze of such scale and complexity could only have been built to contain something monstrous. The myth, then, is not a historical account but a post hoc explanation, a narrative cobbled together from physical remnants and linguistic clues to make sense of a magnificent but incomprehensible past. However, other theorists propose a more direct link, suggesting the labyrinth myth encodes a profound cultural memory of Minoan power and practices. As we've discussed, the Minoan thalassocracy likely demanded tribute from subject peoples on the Greek mainland. This tribute could have included not just goods, but people, perhaps young men and women, sent to serve in the Knossos palace or in religious capacities. For these Athenians or Mycenaeans, arriving at the immense, bewildering palace would have been a terrifying experience. The intricate layout, the advanced culture, the potentially unfamiliar religious rites, all of it could have been perceived as menacing and inhuman. The image of a monster at the center of a maze could be a powerful metaphor for the consuming and terrifying nature of Minoan domination as viewed from the outside. The bull-leaping frescoes found at Knossos, depicting acrobats vaulting over a charging bull, might have been misinterpreted by mainlanders as literal depictions of human sacrifice to a bull-headed deity, further cementing the monstrous imagery in the emerging legend. A more controversial and speculative theory ventures into the realm of archaeoacoustics and sensory experience. Some researchers have noted the peculiar acoustic properties within the Palace of Knossos. The layout of the corridors and chambers, coupled with the complex drainage system running beneath the floors, can create strange and disorienting sound effects. A noise made in one part of the palace can seem to emanate from a completely different location, and low, rumbling sounds can travel unexpectedly through the stone. Could the bellowing of the Minotaur have been inspired by such phenomena? If rituals involving bull masks or the actual sounds of cattle from the central courtyard were amplified and distorted by the palace's unique acoustics, it might have given rise to stories of an unseen, bellowing creature trapped somewhere within the confusing walls, a monster heard but never quite seen. Yet, for all these theories that root the myth in the physical reality of Knossos, a strong counter-argument persists from scholars who emphasize its purely symbolic and psychological nature. They argue that the labyrinth is a universal archetype, a symbol that appears independently in cultures worldwide, from Native American sand paintings to medieval cathedral floors. Its power lies not in its resemblance to any one building, but in its profound representation of the human condition, the confusing journey of life, the struggle with our inner demons, and the search for a center of meaning. In this view, the Palace of Knossos is merely a convenient and impressive placeholder that later cultures used to anchor a pre-existing powerful story. The myth, they contend, is true not because it happened, but because it is always happening inside each of us, regardless of any archaeological discovery. The debate between these perspectives is not likely to be settled by a single artifact or inscription. Instead, it is the tension itself that enriches our understanding, allowing the legend of the labyrinth to be both a ghost of a magnificent Bronze Age palace and a timeless mirror reflecting our own endless navigations through the complexities of life. The story of the Minotaur is far from an isolated tale of a monstrous hybrid. It is a single, powerful thread in the vast and intricate tapestry of global mythology, where the blending of human and animal forms has always been a profound way to explore the boundaries of nature, humanity, and the divine. Across cultures and millennia, these composite beings give physical shape to our deepest anxieties about the wildness within ourselves and the terrifying unknown that lies beyond the safety of our communities. The Minotaur stands as a classic example of the rhynthropy, the mythological ability of humans to metamorphose into animals, but its specific form as a permanent, congenital hybrid places it in a particularly chilling category. It is a being that exists in a state of perpetual conflict, its very body a battlefield between civilization and primal instinct, a walking, breathing contradiction that both fascinated and horrified the ancient Greeks. To fully appreciate the Minotaur's place in this pantheon of monsters, we can look to another famous hybrid from Greek mythology that presents a different kind of challenge, the Sphinx. While the Minotaur was a creature of brute physical force confined to its dark maze, the Sphinx was a being of lethal intellect perched on a roadside outside Thebes. With the body of a lion, the wings of a great bird, and the head of a human woman, she represented a different fusion. the raw power of nature combined with the cunning of the human mind. Her weapon was not tooth and claw, but the riddle. She would stop travelers and pose her famous question: what walks on 4 legs in the morning, 2 legs at noon, and 3 legs in the evening? Those who failed to answer were devoured, their bodies a testament to the danger of failing to use one's human reason. Where the Minotaur's labyrinth was a physical puzzle, the Sphinx herself was a living one. Both creatures were ultimately defeated by heroes Theseus and Oedipus, but their defeats symbolized the overcoming of different human fears, the triumph over bestial chaos and the triumph over intellectual pride and ignorance. Within its own cultural family, the Minotaur also finds interesting parallels and contrasts with other Greek hybrids like the centaurs. These creatures, with the upper body of a man and the lower body of a horse, also embodied a struggle between dual natures. They were often depicted as wild, lustful, and unruly, prone to drunkenness and violence, symbolizing the untamed, animalistic passions that could overtake human reason. However, unlike the singular, monstrous Minotaur, centaurs were a race, and some, like the wise and noble Chiron, were exceptions who represented the potential for harmony between these natures. Chiron was a renowned teacher and healer, mentor to heroes like Achilles and Asclepius. This duality within the same species of hybrid shows a more nuanced Greek view. The combination of human and animal was not automatically monstrous. It could be dangerous and wild, but it could also be wise and beneficial. The Minotaur, in its lonely, irredeemable monstrosity, represents a far more tragic and absolute failure of this balance. This tradition of hybrid creatures is a universal human phenomenon, not confined to the Mediterranean. Ancient Egypt revered deities with animal features, seeing them not as monsters but as manifestations of divine power. The god Anubis, with the head of a jackal, an animal associated with cemeteries, was a guide for the dead and an emblem of protection. The fierce goddess Sekhmet bore the head of a lioness, channeling the sun's scorching, destructive power. Here, the animal aspect was not a downgrade but an enhancement, a symbol of the god's specific domain and authority. In Mesopotamian myth, the Lamashu and Shedu were colossal protective spirits with the body of a bull or lion, the wings of an eagle, and the head of a human male, their hybrid forms representing immense strength, speed, and intelligence combined to guard palaces and cities from demonic forces. These figures show that the blending of forms was often intended to inspire awe and protection rather than just fear, creating idealized guardians that surpassed the limitations of any single natural form. The legacy of these ancient hybrids, and the Minotaur chief among them, flows directly into the heart of our modern fantasy genres. The Minotaur itself has become a staple fantasy race, often shedding its tragic origins to become a proud warrior culture in countless novels, role-playing games, and films. More broadly, the archetype of the misunderstood monster, a being shunned for its appearance, is a direct inheritance from myths like that of Asterion. We see this echoed in characters like the Beast from Beauty and the Beast, Frankenstein's creature, and even the X-Men, whose mutations make them modern-day hybrids, feared and persecuted by a world that does not understand them. These stories force us to ask the same questions the Greeks did. What makes a monster? Is it appearance, origin, or action? The Minotaur's enduring power lies in its ability to be all three, yet still evoke a flicker of pity for a life that never had a chance to be anything else. It remains the ultimate symbol of the beast we fear we might become, and the humanity we sometimes fail to recognize in the other. Beyond the realm of myth and archaeology, the legend of the Labyrinth has found a vibrant and vital second life as one of history's most enduring teaching tools. Its power lies in its perfect structure as a story. It is a narrative package containing a compelling hero, a terrifying monster, a clever princess, a tragic inventor, and a puzzle that is both physical and metaphorical. For educators, this rich tapestry offers a gateway to a multitude of subjects, making the ancient world immediately accessible and thrilling for students of all ages. The tale is not presented as a dry historical fact to be memorized, but as a living, breathing mystery that invites curiosity, critical thinking, and personal connection. In history and social studies classrooms, the legend becomes a dynamic entry point for exploring the fascinating Minoan civilization. Instead of starting with pottery typologies or trade routes, teachers can begin with the story itself. Students are instantly captivated by the image of the Minotaur and the brilliant heroism of Theseus. This engagement creates a natural desire to understand the world that could have produced such a story. From there, educators can seamlessly transition to showing images of the sprawling palace of Knossos, the vibrant bull-leaping frescoes, and the iconic Labyrinth symbol. The students are no longer looking at unrelated artifacts. They are examining the potential inspiration for the Labyrinth, the training ground for the bull leapers who might have inspired the Minotaur, and the sacred symbol that gave the myth its name. This story-first approach transforms archaeology from a dusty science into a thrilling detective story, where every potsherd and painting becomes a clue in a 3,000-year-old mystery. The ethical dilemmas woven throughout the story provide fertile ground for profound discussions in philosophy and character education. The myth is refreshingly devoid of simple black and white characters, offering instead a cast of morally complex figures that prompt students to debate and reflect. They can explore the concept of duty through Theseus, who volunteers for almost certain death to save his people. They can analyze the nature of betrayal and compassion through Ariadne, who helps a foreigner against her own father and kingdom. The tragic figure of Daedalus allows for conversations about the moral responsibility of the creator and the unintended consequences of genius. Even the Minotaur can be a catalyst for discussing empathy, otherness, and whether a creature is born a monster or made into one by its circumstances. These discussions move beyond the ancient world, encouraging students to draw parallels to modern issues of technology, loyalty, and how we treat those who are different. Furthermore, the labyrinth itself serves as a masterful metaphor for the educational journey. Learning is not a straight, unobstructed path. It is a winding process full of dead ends, confusing turns, and moments of feeling utterly lost. The story validates this experience, normalizing the struggle and the frustration that comes with tackling a difficult new concept. Ariadne's thread becomes a powerful symbol for the tools we use to navigate this confusion. The encouragement of a teacher, the support of a study group, the logical process of the scientific method, or the critical thinking skills we gradually develop. The myth teaches that it is not shameful to need a guide or a tool. In fact, it is the wisest strategy. The ultimate victory is not about brute force alone, but about using intellect, resourcefulness, and the help of others to find your way to understanding, which is the true center of the educational labyrinth. In this way, an ancient tale of a monster becomes a timeless lesson in resilience, intellectual courage, and the collaborative joy of solving life's great puzzles. Perhaps what gives the legend of the labyrinth its truly timeless power is that it is far more than a simple monster-slaying adventure. It is a mirror held up to the most fundamental aspects of the human condition. At its heart, this is a story about courage, not the absence of fear, but the will to act in spite of it. Theseus volunteers to walk into the darkness not because he is unafraid, but because his compassion for his people and his sense of duty are greater than his fear. It is a story about ingenuity, reminding us that our greatest tools are often not brute strength, but our intellect and our ability to seek help. Ariadne's simple ball of thread, a symbol of connection and cleverness, is what truly defeats the maze, proving that even the most inescapable seeming problems can be solved with creativity and a clear mind. This ancient tale continues to resonate because each of us, in our own way, faces labyrinths every day. We navigate the confusing corridors of difficult choices, the winding paths of personal challenges, and the dark corners of our own anxieties. The monster at the center might be a fear we've been avoiding, a difficult conversation we need to have, or a personal struggle we must finally confront. The myth does not promise an easy journey, but it does offer a profound and enduring blueprint for navigating it. It teaches us that we all need our own version of Ariadne's thread, that lifeline of support, whether it comes from friends, family, faith, or our own inner resolve, to guide us back to the light when we feel most lost. The story's endurance across 3,000 years is a testament to its deep, universal truth. It has inspired artists and architects, given comfort to pilgrims, provided a framework for therapists, and thrilled generations with its potent blend of mystery and heroism. It connects us to the awe that ancient visitors must have felt when they first saw the sprawling palace of Knossos, and to the timeless human urge to explain the world through stories that are as entertaining as they are meaningful. The Labyrinth is not a relic of the past, it is a living symbol, constantly reinvented to help us understand the complexities of our present. If this journey into one of history's greatest mysteries has captivated your imagination, you are not alone. The world is filled with countless enigmas waiting to be explored, each with its own lessons to teach us about who we are and where we come from. What historical puzzle fascinates you the most? Is there a legend from your own culture that shares this theme of a journey into the unknown? Share your thoughts and your own favorite mysteries in the comments below. I love hearing from you and discovering what sparks your curiosity. And if you want to continue exploring the wonders of the past, be sure to subscribe and hit the bell so you don't miss our next adventure into the shadows of history. Thank you for watching, and remember, every great discovery begins with a single question.